The savannah was unusually quiet that night. No chirping insects, no distant roars, just wind whistling low through the acacia trees, brushing past the dry grass like a whisper of something coming. Something no one could see, but the land somehow already knew. She had wandered far from the herd. The old matriarch had watched her closely all day, sensing something, but the young mother, barely past her teens, had slipped away as dusk fell. They thought it was just nerves. Young mothers sometimes distance themselves before labor, but this time it felt different because she didn't come back. No trumpeting for help, no sounds of pain, nothing, until long past midnight when a single broken cry tore through the darkness. Not a roar, not even a trumpet, but a low, desperate sound, one that would haunt the rangers forever. When the ranger team received the call, they assumed it was another poaching alert. But as they arrived at the edge of the reserve, guided only by moonlight and the distant sound of weeping wind, they found no snares, no hunters, just silence and a trail. It was faint, a disturbance in the dirt and flattened grass, but it was enough. They followed it deep into the bush, flashlights scanning wildly, hearts pounding harder with every step, until one of them, Thomas, froze. "There," he whispered, pointing. She was lying under a knotted tree, her massive body curled unnaturally, her eyes wide with something that wasn't fear, but something far worse, loss. And beside her, still slick from birth, was the calf, too still, too quiet. Thomas dropped to his knees before even thinking. He'd seen death, too many times, but not like this, not with the mother still trying, nudging the calf with her trunk, making low, guttural rumbles like lullabies caught in sorrow. "She gave birth out here, completely alone," one of the others murmured. "No help, no warmth, just darkness." The calf twitched, barely. It hadn't stood once. And as hours passed, the cold crept in. The young mother refused to leave its side, shielding it with her body, swaying, moaning softly. Thomas radioed the rescue unit. "We have a live calf, but barely. And the mother, she's not letting anyone near. We need help, fast." But help takes time in the wild, and time wasn't something the baby had. Minutes stretched into an hour. The moon shifted. The wind picked up. The baby still hadn't stood. Its breasts were shallow, spaced too far apart, like a rhythm slowly forgetting itself. The mother, exhausted and trembling, refused to rest. She continued to nudge the calf gently, as if her touch alone could will life back into it. Thomas tried approaching again, but the mother lifted her trunk and let out a low, warning trumpet. Not angry, just desperate. Desperate to protect what little hope she had left. The rescue team finally arrived. 3 veterinarians and a portable heating unit hauled in by a jeep they had to push half the way. They moved slowly, speaking in whispers, knowing that fear could ruin everything. They placed the heating pad beneath the calf, inserted fluids, checked vitals, massaged its limbs. But the numbers didn't look good. Hypothermic, weak pulse, delayed response. "He's fading," one of the vets whispered. And yet, the mother didn't stop. She circled her baby in slow, mournful loops. Each pass, she paused and touched his head, as if saying goodbye, as if counting every second in case it was the last. Then something shifted. The baby let out a sound, not loud but unmistakable, a whimper. The mother froze, and then, impossibly, she trumpeted, not with fear this time, but with hope. She nudged him harder. The calf's leg kicked once, then again. The vets looked at each other in disbelief. "He's trying." With one final push, the mother knelt, placed her trunk gently under his belly, and lifted. And he stood. Wobbly, barely, but he stood. In the stillness of that dark savannah, surrounded by trees and mist and men too stunned to speak, a miracle had unfolded. Not from medicine, not from machines, but from a mother who refused to give up. He stood, fragile as a shadow in the wind, legs trembling beneath his still wet body. But he was up, and for that moment, that breath in time, the world held still. The mother reached toward him, gently curling her trunk around his tiny frame, steadying him as he swayed. He leaned into her, his forehead pressing into the warmth of her leg, like he remembered what safety felt like. But then came the part no one expected. After the calf's first few shaky steps, he suddenly collapsed again, his tiny body giving in to exhaustion. The relief that had bloomed in everyone's chest was quickly replaced by dread. One of the vets crouched, checking his vitals again. His heart struggling, standing took too much out of him. The team scrambled, preparing a second injection, something to stabilize his pulse. But the mother intervened. She stepped in front of the vet and lowered herself to the ground, wrapping her body protectively around her baby. She wasn't done trying, not yet. And then she did something no one could explain. She began humming, not trumpeting, not growling, a deep, rhythmic vibration from her chest, almost like a lullaby. Soft, persistent, a song only a mother could sing, a sound that carried through the trees and seemed to reach places no medicine could. The baby stirred. Slowly, his ears flicked. Then his trunk lifted, just slightly. His legs pulled beneath him again, and this time, he didn't just rise. He walked, wobbly, weak, unsteady, but forward, one step, then another. The entire team watched in silent awe as the mother rose beside him, their silhouettes illuminated by the pale dawn light breaking over the hills. It was more than recovery, it was resurrection, and it had come not from intervention, but from love. The two moved slowly through the clearing, mother and calf, still bathed in the haze of early morning mist. Every step the baby took seemed to defy the night they had just survived. His legs still buckled now and then, but each time he corrected himself faster, steadier, as if the rhythm of his mother's breath gave him balance. The rangers watched, unmoving. One of them whispered, "I've never seen anything like this." The vet who had once held the needle now clutched it by his side, forgotten, as if nature herself had said, "I've got this." But the mother wasn't finished. She led her baby to the center of the field where the ground was firmer, dry from a patch of sun. There she knelt once more, massive legs folding carefully beneath her, and nudged the calf to her belly. He responded instinctively, latching onto her for milk for the very first time. It was quiet, not a reverent kind of silence, but something heavier, the kind that presses against your chest, the kind that makes you forget to breathe. No one spoke, no one moved, because this wasn't just survival, it was the return of life. As the calf suckled, his tail gave the tiniest flick, barely noticeable, but to the mother, it was everything. Her trunk curled, and for a brief moment, she touched the calf's back the way a human might hold their newborn's hand. And then, as if the forest itself was listening, the distant sound of other elephants echoed through the trees. The herd had heard. The miracle wasn't just that the baby lived, it was that he had lived long enough for them to find him. A faint rumble grew louder, feet pounding the earth like drums in a slow crescendo. Out of the tree line came the matriarch first, her ears wide, her eyes locked on the mother and calf. And behind her, the rest of them. They didn't rush, they didn't panic. They moved with purpose, circling the mother slowly, surrounding her not with dominance, but with reverence. The calf paused from feeding and looked around, eyes wide. He seemed confused by the giant shapes approaching, but not afraid, because every sound they made was soft. Every move was slow. The matriarch extended her trunk and placed it gently on the calf's head. And the mother? She wept, not in the way humans cry, but in the way only an elephant can. Shoulders shivering, breath hitching, tears silently slipping down her wrinkled cheek. Because she wasn't alone anymore. Because her baby had made it. Because the forest had watched and answered. But the reunion didn't end there. The herd, sensing the weight of what had happened, did something extraordinary. One by one, each elephant approached the newborn, not with haste, but with ceremonial grace. They extended their trunks to gently brush his tiny frame, a ritual only reserved for the most sacred of moments, like the welcoming of a new soul. The matriarch stepped forward again. Towering and wise, she let out a low rumbling sound, a call that vibrated through the earth. The baby lifted his head at the sound, responding with a soft, unsure squeak. The mother nudged him forward, encouraging him to meet the leader of the herd. And when he did, the matriarch dropped to her knees. Gasps echoed among the rangers still watching from the trees. They had seen elephants mourn. They had seen them fight. But they had never seen one bow. It was as if the entire herd had acknowledged what this mother had endured. The pain, the darkness, the silence, and what she had done in spite of it all. The younger elephants, still not yet mothers themselves, stood back, watching with awe. They didn't understand the full story, but they felt it. In the way the wind shifted, in the way the trees stilled, in the way their elders carried themselves. A baby had been born, alone, in the dark, but not unloved, not anymore. Then something even more unbelievable happened. The entire herd, every elephant, began to circle the mother and calf in a slow, deliberate motion. They moved in silence, creating a protective ring. This time he leaned on a fallen branch, struggling, falling, squealing in frustration. The herd didn't interfere, but they circled closer. It was as if they were teaching him something wordless. You don't have to do it perfectly, you just have to try. So he did, again and again, until finally, legs shaking like reeds in wind, the baby stood, fully. Not for long, maybe just for 10 seconds, but it was enough to send a ripple of trumpets through the herd that made birds take flight from trees. The rangers didn't cheer. They wept, because they knew what it had taken to get here. A birth in darkness, a mother almost broken, a calf nearly lost, and a herd that stayed, a herd that believed. And that belief, more than anything, was what lifted him. From that moment on, the calf's steps became stronger, steadier. He wobbled beside his mother, each movement a small rebellion against the weakness that had once kept him down. The older elephants didn't rush him. They simply walked at his pace, forming a circle of patience around his every stumble. Even the youngest members of the herd, usually full of playful mischief, slowed down to match his rhythm, as if recognizing the sacredness of his journey. The forest seemed to change too. Birdsong returned to the canopy. The tension in the underbrush faded. Streams that had once run too quietly to notice now bubbled with renewed clarity. Even the wind, once howling through the night like a warning, now whispered softly through the trees, brushing past the calf's ears like a lullaby. Rangers rotated in shifts, always keeping their distance but never leaving entirely. They brought food for the herd's matriarch and monitored the mother's health through binoculars and soft-spoken notes. One ranger, Lena, started journaling the calf's progress in a weathered notebook, sketching his posture, his first successful trunk curl, and the moment he recognized her from afar and let out a squeaky trumpet. That moment melted her, because it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about trust and healing. On the fifth night, when a thunderstorm rolled in unexpectedly, the herd didn't scatter. Instead, they gathered tightly, shielding the calf with their bodies, their massive forms absorbing the pelting rain and gusting wind like guardians sculpted from the earth itself. The calf, now standing confidently beneath his mother's belly, didn't flinch once. His eyes remained wide open, watching, learning, absorbing the power of protection. And when the storm passed, the baby did something no one expected. He trumpeted, loud, joyful, free. It wasn't the squeaky sound from before. It was strong, clear, a declaration to the world, I am here, I made it. And in that single call, everything changed. His trumpet echoed across the valley, cutting through the mist like a promise. Raw, beautiful, and defiant. Birds scattered from the treetops, startled not by fear, but by the clarity of new life claiming its space. The mother elephant, who had once been a husk of exhaustion and grief, lifted her trunk to the sky and responded with a low, rumbling call of her own. Not a warning, not a cry, but an answer, a mother's answer. Around them, the herd froze. Then one by one, they joined the chorus. Old bulls, young calves, mothers with their own young. Each added their voice to the call, not just in celebration of the newborn, but in solidarity with the journey he had taken to get there. It wasn't just the birth they were honoring. It was the miracle of him standing, the miracle of his survival. Lena, standing on a distant ridge with her journal clutched to her chest, felt her eyes well up. She'd seen births in the wild before, but never like this. Never with this level of quiet resistance. This was not just a calf. He was a symbol of how fragile things can still become strong, of how hope, even in its most broken form, can heal everything it touches. In the days that followed, the calf grew fast. His legs no longer trembled. His ears perked with curiosity. He began to play, chasing butterflies and nudging other calves. And the mother, once too weak to lift her head, now walked beside him with the power of every mother who's ever clawed her way back from despair. One afternoon, while the sun burned low over the treetops, the calf wandered to a shallow stream. He looked down, startled by his reflection, and trumpeted again, this time out of surprise. He stumbled, splashing into the water, and looked back toward the herd. But instead of rushing to him, the herd waited, because they knew. He didn't need saving anymore. He needed space, to grow, to lead, to live. But something else lingered in the air. A shift, subtle yet undeniable. The mother, still tender from the trauma of her solitary labor, kept a watchful eye on her son as he splashed and explored. Her body bore the weight of recovery, but her spirit was alight with purpose. Every step he took away from her was like a silent thread stretching between them, fragile, invisible, and sacred. Yet the herd didn't pull him back. Instead, they formed a loose circle, giving him freedom within protection. They had seen too much loss not to recognize the gift of life when it stood, wobbly-legged and wide-eyed, right in front of them. As night fell again, the calf curled up beside his mother, his tiny trunk draped across her leg. The stars blinked into view one by one, as if paying tribute. Lena, from a respectful distance, scribbled furiously in her notebook. But no words could truly capture what she had just witnessed. Because this wasn't just a birth story, it was a rebirth. For a mother, for a herd, for everyone lucky enough to bear witness. And deep in the dark, as the wind rustled the leaves and crickets sang their lullaby, a soft, rhythmic breath rose and fell beneath a canopy of starlight. One breath, then another, then another. A lullaby not sung, but lived, by a miracle once too weak to stand, now resting in the heart of everything that mattered. But that night, under the hush of the stars and the low whispers of the trees, something remarkable happened. The baby stirred, at first just a flick of his ear, then his trunk twitched, lightly brushing against his mother's leg. Lena, who had been dozing off near the edge of the clearing, jolted awake at the sound. The entire herd seemed to pause, holding its breath with her. He tried once and fell back, a second time, knees trembling. Then with a quiet grunt, almost like a sigh from the earth itself, the calf rose, shaky, wobbly, but standing. A ripple went through the herd. It wasn't a cheer or a trumpet, not yet. It was silence filled with awe. Lena's hands flew to her mouth. She felt her heart catch as the baby took his first tentative step, then another, and then collapsed, belly first, into the grass. But it didn't matter, because he had stood, and that was enough to make the entire forest seem to breathe again. The mother, exhausted but glowing, nudged her son gently with her trunk. Not to push him, not to move him, just to say, "I saw you." And he, with sleepy eyes and a muddy cheek, leaned into that touch. That night, no one slept. Not the elephants, not Lena. The jungle itself seemed to stay awake, whispering ancient lullabies into the air, echoing between the leaves and stars above. Because miracles don't need to shout. Sometimes they whisper in wobbly footsteps and starlit silences. And everyone lucky enough to witness it never forgets. As the calf rested, curled beside his mother's towering legs, the herd began to move, slowly, almost ceremonially, forming a loose circle around them. It wasn't protection, it was reverence, a quiet honoring of life that had dared to rise when no one thought it could. Lena remained still, not wanting to interrupt the sacredness of the moment. But as dawn began to paint soft streaks of orange across the canopy, one of the older females, massive and wrinkled with a tusk broken near the tip, turned and approached her. The elephant stopped just a few feet away. She looked at Lena, not past her, not through her, at her. And then, ever so gently, she lowered her head, an ancient bow of trust and gratitude. Tears stung Lena's eyes. She hadn't done anything extraordinary, not really. She had just stayed, just cared, just held space in a moment most would have walked away from. But in that jungle clearing, that was everything. And then, almost magically, the rest of the herd followed suit, not with bows or flourishes, but with presence, a silent procession of acceptance of one human into their story. By the time the sun was fully up, the baby was trying again, legs steadier now, his little trunk flailing clumsily with excitement. He made it 4 steps this time before tripping over his own feet and rolling in the dirt. The herd let out a soft chorus of low rumbles, like laughter in an ancient language. Even Lena laughed, half from relief, half from wonder. What had started in the dark, with panic and fear and a birth cloaked in uncertainty, had blossomed into something timeless. Not just survival, but connection. And for the first time in weeks, Lena felt whole. Not because she had saved anything, but because she had been there when it mattered. The calf tried again. This time his legs didn't tremble as violently. He took 1 step, then another. A hush fell over the herd, as if the entire jungle itself had paused to watch. Lena held her breath, and then the little elephant let out a squeaky trumpet, clumsy and high-pitched, and stumbled into his mother's chest with a joyful thud. The mother, exhausted yet radiant, wrapped her trunk around him and pulled him close. A wave of low rumbles passed through the herd like a song, one Lena didn't understand with her ears but felt in her bones. It was pride, relief, celebration, and then something unexpected happened. One by one, the elephants approached the newborn, not to sniff or inspect, but to gently touch him with their trunks, on his back, on his tiny head, on the tip of his tail. It was a ritual Lena had only read about, something rare, reserved only for calves that carried extraordinary hope. She didn't know why they believed this one was special, but she did. He had been born into the dark, alone, cold, and lifeless, and now, surrounded by those who never gave up on him, he stood. It was more than instinct, it was will. It was the memory of his mother's heartbeat in the shadows, the feel of Lena's hand steadying his breath, the rumble of a herd that waited instead of walking away. Lena dropped to her knees, not out of exhaustion, but reverence. The tears she had held back all night finally spilled over. It was too much. The beauty, the silence, the reminder that sometimes the smallest lives carry the biggest miracles. She didn't notice the matriarch standing behind her until a shadow fell across her shoulders. The same old elephant who had bowed to her earlier now reached out again, with slow, deliberate grace, and gently touched Lena's shoulder with the tip of her trunk. It was a thank you and a goodbye, because the herd was preparing to move. Lena didn't move. She let the old matriarch's trunk rest on her shoulder for a moment longer, memorizing the weight, the warmth, the wordless acknowledgement. Then, one by one, the elephants began to shift, not with urgency, but with grace, like a tide returning to the ocean after leaving behind a gift on the shore. The newborn calf, now slightly steadier on his feet, walked beside his mother with a wobble that was equal parts strength and stubbornness. He paused once, just once, to turn back. His tiny eyes met Lena's, and though no one could ever prove it, Lena would spend the rest of her life certain that he remembered her, that in that fleeting second, something passed between them, a bond forged not in blood, but in breath, in the fight for life shared under a sky that had almost swallowed him whole. The herd disappeared into the mist, their silhouettes fading like a dream at dawn. Lena stood alone now, the clearing empty, but for the prints in the mud, hundreds of them, deep and wide and filled with rainwater, like small mirrors of the sky. She walked through them slowly, boots splashing, her heart both full and broken at once. She knew no one back at the ranger station would ever truly understand what happened here tonight. How a baby born without hope had taught her more about courage than any book or briefing ever could. She looked up at the sky. The storm had passed. The clouds were parting. And from the shadows of the jungle came a distant sound, a trumpet, light and sharp, like laughter echoing through trees. He was still standing. Weeks later, Lena received a radio message from a patrol deep in the territory. The calf had been spotted again, this time running, not wobbling. He was playing beside his mother, chasing birds, splashing in puddles like the world owed him joy for all he had survived. They had named him Miracle, not for the sake of drama, but because no other word fit. A calf born in darkness, from a mother who had given up waiting for help. A life that wasn't supposed to last beyond sunrise, now galloping freely beneath the same skies that had once tried to bury him. Lena kept the photo, the one taken just after the storm, where her mud-streaked face was barely visible next to a fragile gray shape curled in her arms. Some nights she would stare at it, hand resting over her chest, remembering how the tiniest heartbeat could silence the loudest storm. And deep within the forest, every now and then, she would hear a familiar trumpet, not mournful, not afraid, but proud, as if to say, "I'm still here, because you were too." Because sometimes the most extraordinary rescues don't happen in front of crowds or cameras. They happen in silence, in rain, in the middle of nowhere, and they change everything. If this story touched your heart, share it. Because somewhere out there, another miracle is waiting, and it starts with someone who refuses to walk away.